Hey, what is going on, you guys? AK40 Kevin here in the Gamer Heaven. Today I'm going to walk you guys step by step how to build a Raspberry Pi with RetroPie. If you guys don't know what a Raspberry Pi is, it's a small single board computer that you can pick up between $35 and $75 depending on the model. And you can do a lot of really interesting home DIY projects, such as home automation, or even use this thing as a low-powered home PC. But what we're interested in doing is making this a retro gaming powerhouse. Packing in 30 retro consoles, everything from N64, Dreamcast, Sega Genesis, NES, PlayStation 1, PSP, etc., and a library of about, 20,000 games. The version we're using for today's build is the latest and most powerful version, the Pi 4 with 8 gigabytes of RAM. So let's unbox this bad boy. There will be timestamps in the video as this will be rather long, but you can jump to any section in the video that you specifically need for your build. And let's get up and running with some retro games, boys. Alrighty guys, like I mentioned, this is a step-by-step tutorial. So step one is to hop over here on the PC and help you guys select which Raspberry Pi model to purchase, which one's the best bang for buck, and which one's going to be right for your uses. Alrighty guys, over here on my PC, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We are on the raspberrypi.organization website here. We're going to go over here to hardware to look at some of their current products. They have 3 models that they're currently producing and selling. That would be the Pi 400, which is basically a computer built into a keyboard. It's a Pi 4, but in a larger PCB or printed circuit board that's built inside of a keyboard. We will be building one of these kits on the channel in the near future. If that intrigues you, go ahead and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're aware when we do that build. They also have the Pi Pico. Now this is not a single board computer per se. It retails for $4 US. It is a microcontroller board. You can actually learn how to program on it, doing C++ or Python, stuff like that. And it's really cool for university projects doing robotics and stuff like that, even home automation. For $4, you can do some really interesting stuff with that. But primarily, we're focusing on the Raspberry Pi 4 here. This is the 4th generation of the Raspberry Pi single board computer. As you can see, they've been making these for a while in numerical generations. The Pi Zero is also a very interesting product. It's the lowest cost single board computer, and it's also the smallest form factor, which all the Pis are very tiny. They fit easily in the palm of your hand. But the Pi Zero is very tiny, but the performance is also less than the traditional Raspberry Pis. So before the 4, the latest model we had was the Pi 3B Plus. Those 2 boards that I was holding up in the introduction there, those are both Pi 3Bs. I've had those for quite a while. And then the Pi 4 came out last year in 2020. And this thing's pretty amazing. So each year, the Pi generation stays at the same retail price of $35. This generation's a little bit different because you can select from 2, 4, or 8 gigabytes of onboard RAM, which will change the cost from $35, $55, and $75. The one we're building today is the Pi 4 with 8 gigabytes of RAM. It is the top dog, so to speak, as we are trying to build the ultimate retro gaming station that will have no problem running N64, Dreamcast, PSP, which primarily are the retro consoles and emulations that really stress out the old Pi 3. So I would recommend going for the Pi 4. There's no reason for you to retrofit or go back to the Pi 3 because the retail is the same from each generation, and if you just get the 2 gigabyte version, it's still going to outperform the previous generation Pi 3. I am going to do a separate video comparing the Pi 3B Plus, which is the latest generation before the Pi 4, but real quick, just a couple of the upgrades. Instead of full-size HDMI ports, these are now micro HDMI, and instead of capping out at 1080-30, these can hit 4K 60 on a single monitor or 4K 30 to dual monitors from this little board. Instead of just 4 USB 2 ports, you now have 2 2s and 2 USB 3.0 ports. Ethernet has now been boosted up to gigabit Ethernet, so you can get 1,000 down and up out of the Ethernet. Processor is noticeably more powerful, about 33%. You now have a choice of RAM size, which is a first in Pi models. You have 2, 4, or 8 gigabytes. The power supply is no longer micro USB, it's USB-C. This thing is loaded with Bluetooth 5.0 rather than 4.0, and the onboard Wi-Fi is also faster than the previous generation. So coming over here to Amazon, guys, when you just type in RetroPie, you can buy just the board. However, I would recommend getting a kit because that way you don't need to buy the micro HDMI to full-size HDMI cable. You don't need to buy the power supply. You don't need to buy a separate case. These come with literally everything you need. So all you really do is put the heat sinks and fans on the board, slap it in a case, slide your SD card in there, and you're good to go. Now, if you guys don't want to use a kit and you want to buy everything separately, that's fine. I will be showing you in this guide exactly what to do with a completely blank formatted SD card to get yourself up and running with RetroPie, which is the operating system that we're going to run on the Raspberry Pi to get you all those retro consoles via emulation. But as you can see, this is really your best bang for buck, is going with a pre-built setup like that, considering this is on sale at $100. Plus, you can save an additional 10% with that coupon, and you don't have to buy the HDMI cable, the power source. This SD card is already loaded up with Raspberry Pi OS, which is also called Rasbian, which is a Linux-based operating system. So you literally just slap this together, and you're up and running in literally under 5 minutes. And there's a ton of really interesting kits out there. For example, this one has a touchscreen on the top where you can actually navigate the interface. There's ones that look like little retro consoles. Like this SNES over here, which actually move the USB ports to the front to make it like a little console. And, you know, they're really cool. Just like little 3D printed classic consoles and stuff like that. You can also... They also sell little handheld gaming devices that you can slap one of these cards in there and make like a handheld if you want to play on the go. Now, I personally highly recommend staying away from these SD cards that are already preloaded with games and whatnot for a couple reasons. One, legality. This is actually illegal because they're taking a bunch of licensed games from Nintendo and Sega and Sony and slapping them onto a card. Granted, as a buyer, you're really not the one to blame here. It's the seller. But also, you're paying additional cost when really the price of the SD card is less than what they're charging, and you can do all this stuff yourself, and you can exactly pick and choose what games you want for your library instead of a bunch of crap filler, which a lot of these preloaded images have just a bunch of like duplicates of games or a bunch of games that don't even launch, or if they do launch, they're not optimized for whatever you're emulating. So like N64 would be all glitchy because they didn't install the patches properly to get it all smoothed out for you and stuff. You're better off just burning the image yourself. It's not that difficult. If you watch the rest of this video, you're going to know how to do it. So we already decided we are going to go for a pre-built kit as it is best bang for buck. But if you decide you do want to get just the board alone, on Amazon it is $90 for the 8GB model. And it's kind of hard to find. It seems like the majority of what's found on Amazon is these pre-built kits. Not really just the board itself. So if you want to buy just the board, you'd probably be better off going directly to the Raspberry Pi website, selecting what you want. 8 gigs, you're in the US, and it'll give you some retailers or vendors here, most of which I've never heard of any of these. CanaKit, they've been around forever making these kits here. But yeah, that's the retail right there for the 8GB computer itself. The single board computer is $75 for the 8. Don't pay any more than that, or else you're just getting ripped off. And if you do buy this individually, nothing wrong with that. You're going to need a few things. You're going to need a case. You can run this thing just sitting on your desk as an exposed chip, but you're going to be getting a bunch of dust in there. Not to mention, there's no way of cooling it, so it's going to get really, really hot and potentially throttle or even shut down on you, especially if you're going to try and overclock, which I do recommend overclocking. Then you have to get a micro HDMI, and then you have to get an SD card. And you're going to need a power supply as well, which are a 5-volt, 3-amp USB-C, and you'll probably find those for about $10 to $15. So again, we're going to go with a kit that has everything that we need. Alrighty guys, hop out of my PC. We're going to get over there to the workbench and get this bad boy assembled. So the exact kit that I did get will be linked in the description below, as well as some good alternatives that are a little bit less expensive and a little bit more expensive depending on your needs and your budget. So inside the box we have our actual computer here, Raspberry Pi 4, 8GB model. Lifting up this foam here, you have your instruction manual / quick start guide. Very, very nice quality. You have color pictures, good font. English is the primary language, so page 1 through 7 is your English walkthrough. Reading an instruction manual's okay for these, but a video is a better instructional tool to actually get shown and walk through step by step how to complete something. That's how I learned how to build these, and now I'm passing that on by doing my own tutorial because I have picked up a lot of tips and tricks over the last almost 4.5 years of building these little consoles. Alright, so you have a little Phillips head screwdriver, so that's awesome. This kit literally has everything you need to build, which is great. So this has a 64GB micro SD, and this is also a high quality one. It's their brand, the brand of the kit, Labist, but it's a very high read and write speed. It is a U3. It is U3 grade, which means the read and write speed is going to be absolutely plenty. for our needs here. You have a couple of pads with thermal paste for the CPU and little onboard GPU, as well as a really nice beefy heatsink and dual fans. Yes, these do have RGB, guys. Since we're building a little mini gaming PC, it's got to have RGB, because we know that boosts frames per second, just like stickers on cars make them faster. It adds horsepower and torque. You have two HDMI to micro HDMI cables. So again, I don't know why you would really want to do an individual component build anymore, because this was $120. It did just skyrocket up to $144 as of last night, and I bought this 2 days ago, but I'm sure they'll bring it back down, and there are other kits that are substantially cheaper than that. But you have everything you need. They give you two cables, so if you want to run dual monitors or whatever, you can. Case, heatsink, a good quality micro SD. Got your power supply here. So this does also have an on and off switch here, as that is how you're going to turn your console on and off. And then you have the case itself. So the case looks very, very nice. Going to go ahead and peel this protective film off. Top of the case just pops off like that. And as you see, this top plate here is actually replaceable. This one has really nice venting. We're going to go ahead and use this one, as that is going to let that heat sink and fan blow the heat out of the top of the case. But if you want an all sealed off version, they do have this smoked or tinted glass cover here. So if you don't want the one that has open vents or whatever, and you want to install one that is completely sealed off, you can do that. So that's cool that they offer you two different options for top plates. But again, I kind of like this tempered glass one with the vents on it. I think it'll add just a little bit more airflow, which I want because I am going to be overclocking this. Then you have four little Phillips screws, which are labeled for fan. So again, they make this very, very easy. Awesome, awesome. So as you can see, same size, form factor as a Pi 3B Plus. However, it looks like the gigabit, it looks like the Ethernet port's been swapped with the position of the USB ports. And then also, instead of one full-size HDMI, you now have two micro HDMIs. Instead of the micro USB, you now have USB-C. But everything else looks very, very similar. All right, quick little pro tip for you guys to make sure you didn't get ripped off. There, the RAM chip should say D9ZCL if it is the 8GB model. So just make sure they're not trying to market you an 8GB kit and giving you like a 2 or a 4. Alrighty guys, so the three included thermal pads are double-sided tape, basically, in essence, that also have thermal heat dissipation properties as well. So you don't have actual liquid thermal paste or anything like that, like a traditional PC build. You're going to put them on here, here, and here, over the CPU, the RAM, and the USB controller module. Now, you're going to take your case, and you're going to just drop it in. It makes this a little bit easier if you do it at an angle, and you're just going to line up your 3.5mm audio port and all these ports here. Now you're going to take your heat sink and fans. It only goes in one way. Not only will it only line up with the holes one way, but also it has that cutout there. It's only going to set in there like that. Now you're going to take the four included screws that are labeled for fan, and you're going to use the included screwdriver, and you're going to screw these in, and they go through the heatsink, through the board, into the case. You might have to use a little bit of elbow grease, as these are not threaded. So to make this look a little bit cleaner, I'm going to go ahead and route these wires around the outside of the case. All right, just like that. The red one there is on the 5V, which is the second one down on the right, and the black is on the third one down on the right, which is a ground. Just like that. Now we're going to go ahead and drop the top of our case on. Snaps right on. You're going to go ahead and drop in the micro USB card that is already preloaded with Rasbian, which is a Linux-based operating system specifically for Raspberry Pis. You'll commonly hear it referred to as Pi OS, but that's referring to Rasbian. And that's if you want to use this as kind of a home PC. Basically something you can plug in a mouse and keyboard, browse the web, get some schoolwork done on, stuff like that. We're going to do a little bit of that right now. Then we're also going to take another micro SD card, format that bad boy, and get Raspberry Pi on here, as this is primarily going to be a gaming console for us. We have our new Pi plugged into the TV here as a monitor. We also have a little keyboard and travel mouse plugged into the USB 2.0 ports here. Now, if you are using just one monitor, you want to make sure that you have the micro HDMI cable plugged into the port closest to the power cable here. If you put it in the right port, you're not going to see anything because that is strictly for a secondary monitor. So let's go ahead and turn this bad boy on. Roars to life here. You cannot change the modes for the RGB fans in there. All right, so your initial boot up, you're going to see some delicious little raspberries in the top left screen like that. All right, it's defaulted to 1080p, which is the default resolution for this TV here. It's not a 4K or anything. This is like an 8-year-old TV. All right, my friends, using a stack of papers as a mouse pad. A little ghetto, but you got to do what you got to do. So you're going to select your country here. I am not in the UK. That is where the Pi is created, is in, excuse me, our brothers on the other side of the pond over there in the UK. Language, American English. That is my native tongue. Time zone, so they don't have, I don't like when time zones are listed like this. It doesn't say like Central or Atlantic or Pacific. It's all like LA, Detroit, Denver, what's around me here. And then check these two boxes here. If you are in North America, use English language and use US keyboard, press next. Setting location, please wait. And don't worry about these borders we have around the monitor or TV right now. That is going to be remedied in just a minute, guys. So we are going to create a password for the Pi. This desktop should fill the entire screen. Tick the box below if your screen has black borders at the edges. Yes, it does. Select your Wi-Fi network. Damn, that's good internet. Look away, guys. You don't need to know my password. So this does have Ethernet if you want to hardwire into it. I would probably just use Wi-Fi with this thing. It's not like you're going to be doing any online Call of Duty or anything like that. The operating system and applications will now be checked and updated if necessary. This may involve a large download. Click next or skip. We'll go next. So while it's installing these updates, I gotta say, a quick note, there is some serious fan noise coming out of that thing. That is because we do have it on maximum fan speed. If you're not going to be overclocking this thing and you're strictly going to be doing maybe some desktop work like this, or you're going to be using it strictly for older consoles like NES, Sega Genesis, stuff like that, you don't plan on touching N64, Dreamcast, PSP, PlayStation 1, then you can leave the black wire on the ground, remove the red from the second one on the right, and put it to the top one on the left. And that will put the fan at half speed, so it still gets a little cooling, but it's going to be a lot quieter. But honestly, it's about as loud as my full-size gaming desktop over here, but it's a different sound. It's not super loud, but it definitely is. Like, I could hear a white noise in my room, and I was like, where's that coming from? And I was like, oh, wait, is that the Pi? Put my ear to it, and it's definitely not quiet. Alrighty guys, now I'm going to show you how to install the RetroPie operating system onto your new Raspberry Pi, or if you do want the Rasbian desktop style operating system, which we still have installing updates up there. And downloading operating systems and flashing them onto your RetroPie got a lot easier about a year ago. It used to be you would go search for Rasbian or Noobs or Pi-hole or Ubuntu, whatever operating system you wanted on your RetroPie. Then you would get a program called Etcher, which would flash an image file or .iso onto your SD card, and you'd be able to use it. And you would go to retropie.com and download RetroPie and put the zip file on Etcher and flash it and all that stuff. Those days are done. So now all you need to do is go to the Raspberry Pi website, which is where we started looking at those different consoles or versions they have. You're going to go over here to software, and they now have this awesome program called Pi Imager, which is super cool. So they have it for Mac, Ubuntu, and then of course for Windows 10. So we're going to download that right now. All right, so we need to plug in a micro SD card into our PC. Now, for many of you, including myself, you don't have an SD card reader built into your PC. And definitely not a micro USB reader. These things retail for about $10 or $15 on Amazon. I will have this linked in the description below. This is the cheapest one that I could find that still had solid reviews. It has slots for a full-size SD card and a micro SD card on there as well, which is really, really cool. So we just plugged in a little 32 gigabyte micro SD card into this adapter. We're going to plug it into the top of my PC here, but not before we drop it on the floor. It's good for my old back to be bending down and getting up like that. So this actually does have stuff on it, so we're gonna go ahead and format that. Right click. Our needs, just use the built-in one to Windows. Very, very simple. The default is FAT32. That'll work just fine. And let's format this bad boy. Cool, so we got a brand new 32 gig in there, which actually equates to 29.7 gigabytes of usable space. Now you're going to choose the operating system you want, and again, this is really cool. It has, Raspberry Pi OS, which is previously known as Rasbian. We have Ubuntu, They have Kodi in here, which you can actually, I'll do a separate tutorial. You can actually install Kodi into any RetroPie or Rasbian operating system as a plugin. But again, that's a story for another day. But we're going to come down here to emulation and gaming because that's what we want, guys. And we're going to click on RetroPie. Recall Box is also pretty cool. There's some pretty interesting builds and image files for Recall Box that have some pretty cool features, but RetroPie is the gold here. So you want to make sure that it's for the right model that you are using. So we're on a Raspberry Pi. This would be if you had a Pi 1 or a Pi 0. This is a RPI or Raspberry Pi 2 or 3. We're down here on the 4 or the 400, which is that big long keyboard one with a computer built into it. So we're on a Pi 4. We're going to select that. Select our SD card. All right, D drive. So sometimes it'll have other ones here if you have like an external hard drive plugged into your PC or something, but you should be able to see if it's like a terabyte, you're like, that's not the 32 gigabyte SD card. Don't flash over your stuff. But this is it right here. And then all you need to do is click write. So technically this looks like this would have formatted it anyway, even if we didn't do that manually. This tool does everything all in one. So it would have formatted it first and then flash the RetroPie on there, which is really cool. So with this method, you're getting a blank build of the RetroPie, which is the emulation program that runs on the Raspberry Pi. Now, that doesn't come with any games or ROMs or anything like that. You'll need to install those separately. I will show you how to do that on this video so you can get up and running with some games. I can't tell you specifically where to download these games or ROMs for legality, even if they are legal backups of games that you've owned in the past and whatnot, but I can tell you a simple Google search for PS1 ROMs or N64 ROMs will take you to a ton of results of where to get ROM packs and whatnot. Use the installation method that I'm going to show you how to put the ROMs onto your Pi. But if you want an even similar method than that, you can go to this website right here, Arcade Punks. Now, as the legality is a gray area for this website because they include, images, pre-built images for your RetroPie that have like 30,000 games and Kodi, which is specifically for watching free movies and stuff like that. I would recommend running a VPN. I recommend ExpressVPN. I've been using them for about 2 years. They're on my cell phone, they're on my tablet, they're on my computer. I will have a link in the description below where you can get 30 days free. That is also a affiliate link, so I will get a slight commission for referring you. Definitely supports the channel, and I appreciate it. But I would recommend running this while you're going to be downloading torrent files and whatnot, because again, they're a gray area. You're doing something that isn't, it can be argued that it's blatantly illegal, but honestly, these are games that I have owned at one point in time, so they're technically legal backups, technically legal software backups of hard games that I have owned in the past and just misplaced them. So you're going to go over here to front-end downloads. You're going to go to Pi images. Now there's Pi images right here. This is for the Pi 0, Pi 3. We're going to go to Pi 4 images over here. Now you have all these ones here. And you can click on info over here and it'll give you a little description of the build, maybe a couple screenshots of what the user interface looks like and whatnot. Oh, this one comes with a nice little YouTube video walking you through, everything's on there. Okay, cool. This one comes with 60 retro systems with 32,000 games. You'll need 128 gigabyte SanDisk Ultra to run this. 700 plus PlayStation games. That's a lot. That's almost, I don't know if that's the whole PlayStation library, but that certainly is the majority of the good ones. It's got a Kodi build with Vikings already pre-installed, so you don't need to install Kodi plugins to get up and running with watching your your perfectly legal movies. More than 200 songs installed on this image from the soundtracks of games from the golden era. 34 collections of different titles. Awesome. So depending on what size SD card you have, they generally go from the smaller ones down here, like an 8 gigabyte build right here, 64, 30, 32, so that's a little bit backwards, but and then up here you'll start getting into the 128s and 256 builds, which are crazy. So you're going to download these. They all do come as a torrent file. Now you're going to need a program if you take this route called QB Torrent. I will have that linked in the description below. And again, when you're running this, just turn your VPN on. You're going to unpack your torrent file, and you're going to use that program called HYPR that I told you guys about. Balena.io.etcher right here. Take the torrent once it's already downloaded. Just unzip it with something like WinZip or 7-Zip, which are both free to use, very small file sizes, and their whole purpose is to unzip compressed files. So you're going to unzip those, and then you're going to select your torrented image, select the drive. I like this one, the Pandemic Collection. Everyone's bored at home, and now you have a ton of retro games to play. So you're going to take your torrented image file, use Balena Etcher here, and flash your image, and then plug that SD card into your RetroPie, and you're good to go. So that's how you get full-blown, already loaded out images with, you know, all the consoles and games already on them and all that stuff. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to continue with the stock base RetroPie build and how you're going to add games to that. Alright, so as you can see, you can now remove the SD card from the reader. It has been complete, and we're going to do that in just a minute here. So now this has a clean build or operating system of RetroPie on it. So we'll be able to browse the user interface and whatnot, go through some settings, but there won't be any games or ROMs on there just yet. We're going to install them right now. So in order to do that, you're going to take a USB drive like this, a little flash drive. If you're just adding a handful of SNES games or Genesis or something like that, actually, you could probably put over the entire Sega Genesis and SNES and Nintendo like NES library on like an 8 gig stick, because those game files are really, really small. Think about it, those cartridges didn't hold a lot of data. But when you start getting into some of the disc-based platforms like PS1, or even some of the bigger cartridges like N64, those game files were substantially bigger, and you are going to need yourself a bigger stick if you want to transfer over several games at a time, or you could just go back and forth between your PC, your RetroPie, your PC, your RetroPie to get all your games over. So we're going to go ahead and plug this into the top of the PC and format it. So I know for a fact this has stuff on it because it should have the Windows 10 launcher on it. Yep, this has the Windows 10 operating system installer on it. So we're going to go ahead and flash that bad boy. Now, before we eject this drive here, you're going to open it up and create a new folder, and this is going to be titled RetroPie. All one word, all lowercase, spelled just like that. And now we can go ahead and eject this. All right, so our updates are finally done. That took about, I'm not going to lie, probably about 2 hours or so. I was working on other projects and stuff, just had it running in the background. But as you can see, it did prompt a restart after the installs were done to, or the updates were done to install them. And now, as you can see, that border around the outside is done. I am going to make a separate video going over the interface for Raspberry Pi OS, aka Rasbian, talking a little bit about some of the things you can do and can't do within this operating system, and basically my thoughts and kind of an overall review of this as an operating system. I will also be doing that for all the other operating systems, such as Noob and Pi-hole and all that other good stuff. But for now, we're going to go ahead and turn this thing off. I don't recommend when you're using Raspberry Pi OS or Rasbian to shut down with just by turning off the power switch. I recommend just shutting it down like a regular PC, so that way you don't corrupt your SD card with the operating system on it. However, inside of RetroPie, you can shut down manually, but you know, for the longest time, I was shutting down just by turning off the power switch inside of RetroPie, and had no issues. All right, so now it looks like the software has been shut down. This thing is still running, obviously, because, you know, it's still getting power. We're going to go ahead and turn it off. And I will say, this thing actually gets pretty warm for not being overclocked yet or anything like that. It puts out a good amount of heat on the bottom, and then you can also feel warm air blowing out of the top with those fans. So the Pi 4 gets quite a bit hotter than my experience with the Pi 3 and 3B Plus. There we go. Now we're going to pop in the SD card where we installed RetroPie on. Turn her back on. Set this aside for now. Try and get that halo ring glare off the TV. All right, we got it, guys. RetroPie. Good stuff. So I'm going to show you guys how to get this set up with a controller and everything so you can actually play some games. So this boot up screen you are going to see every time that you turn on the RetroPie. However, they have what's called splash screens, which are basically these cool animated videos that'll play. So instead of just seeing this text run every time, you'll see this cool thing. It's usually retro themed. It'll be like, you know, 80s comics and arcade systems and stuff. And I will have a separate video how to add splash screen videos. But it usually doesn't take this long. The initial start, we'll have to run all these scripts and stuff, but in future times it'll take about 30 seconds or so, and you'll see all this text run down unless you have an animated splash screen. Alright, so as you see, it says no gamepads detected. You are going to need to plug something in. You can add Bluetooth controllers to this console. However, for your first setup, you will need to plug in a USB controller. So I got this little PS2 generic one here. You can just use an Xbox or PlayStation controller and just plug that in via USB to the front of this. Alright, press any button. It's going to say USB joystick. Now you're going to map everything. D-pad, up, down, left, right, start, select. A button, which would be X. B button, which would be circle. X button, which would be square, you know, Xbox layout style. And Y, which would be triangle. Left shoulder is L1. Right shoulder would be R1. Left trigger, right trigger. Left thumbstick is clicking down on L3. Right thumbstick, clicking down on R3. And then for hotkey enable, by default, it's if you don't choose anything, it's going to ask you to go with the default, which is select, which we're just going to choose anyway. So what that does is, when you press start and select together, it knows that this is the hotkey, so this is how you're going to get out of games and stuff and go back to the home menu, is by pressing both start and select. We're also going to map one more controller. We have this little NES controller right here. You're going to press start with this one here and go down to configure input. It's going to say, should say 2 gamepads detected. We're going to go ahead and do this one here. Left, right, start, select, A, B, and of course we don't have any of these other buttons, so we're just going to hold down. We don't have any of these buttons. This was a simpler time in gaming, boys. There wasn't 30 buttons on a controller. So as you see, we have a border here. Again, when we restart, that should go away. So right now, as you see, the only option we have in the interface is the RetroPie settings here, because we don't have any game consoles installed. But when you do, you'll be able to scroll through them vertically or horizontally. To access the menu at any time, you press start, and you're able to do these things here. Scraper helps you get box art for games, but again, if you're using an image file from something like Arcade Punks, it'll already have all that stuff in there. When you put a new controller in, you go to controller input and remap. So we're just going to enter the settings real quick. So audio by default is just going to be going through the HDMI cable to your TV, but if you're not getting sound, you know, you can remap it to the 3.5mm headphone jack if you're using headphones or you know, external speakers or something like that. And it should automatically sense whatever you have plugged in, but if it isn't, just go in here. Bluetooth, this is where you can add new Bluetooth devices like controllers or a Bluetooth speaker or something like that. As you see though, we have system sounds. Those can also be turned off. So over here you have themes. You can install emulation station themes, which are really cool. By default, you have this kind of carbon fiber one. This is where you can change your password, boot options. If you have RetroArch, you can use that here. We are just using RetroPie. We're not doing RetroArch program on this build. Splash screens is exactly what I was talking to you guys about earlier, about those cool animated loading screens. I will have a separate video on all this stuff going more in depth with things you can do inside of RetroPie. So in order to get your network set up or your Wi-Fi, you do need to come down to Raspi config here, and then you will go to localization options and set your country, because by default it doesn't know where you're at. You can also set your time zone, and then once you have done that, you can go down to this menu here and go to your Wi-Fi and set up your Wi-Fi network, which we already have done there. As you see, we're set up to Damn That's Good Internet. For navigating this menu, you will need a keyboard. This is a $9 keyboard on Amazon. I'll have it linked in the description below. And you probably will also need a little wired mouse as well, just to navigate initially. All right, so there's 2 ways to get games on this bad boy. One of them is over the network. Well, I'm going to do a separate video on how to do that. The traditional way that's been the method for the longest time is to use a USB flash drive like this. We've already formatted this and installed or created a folder called RetroPie on here. We're going to plug this in to the RetroPie here. If you don't have a flash drive with a status light on it, give it about, I'd say about 3 to 5 minutes. And then we can go ahead and unplug that and bring it back over to the PC to upload our ROMs. Alrighty guys, back over here at the PC. This is that folder we made earlier on our flash drive called RetroPie. But if you open it up, you now have BIOS, configs, and ROMs. So the RetroPie itself, when we plugged in that USB stick, did all this magic in the background and installed this. So when you open up ROMs, you have all these consoles here. There's 29 of them. You can have more than 29 consoles on a RetroPie. I've seen builds that have 40 plus consoles. You know, some real niche stuff, and then also some hacks and kind of like community-made versions of N64 games and stuff like that, which is really cool. But we're going to go ahead and add a couple N64 games just for this tutorial. We're going to open up the N64 folder, and then we'll put this over here to the side. Now, these are some of the N64 ROMs that I have on my PC. We'll just drag a couple over for the heck of it. Let's do Banjo-Kazooie Super Mario 64. Which is, Super Mario 64 is in my opinion, one of the best retro games ever made. I love that game. I still play that game. In fact, I've been considering streaming the entire game start to finish on Twitch. So, all right, now we are going to go ahead and eject this bad boy. Oh, it's in use. Well, excusez-moi. Super Mario game. Look how small these game files are, and that's N64. My goodness. Back over here at the old gaming station on the RetroPie. So now we have not only the RetroPie menu, but we also have N64, and it'll say 2 games available. So let's open it up. I wonder what we could have in here. Banjo-Kazooie and Super Mario. Alrighty guys, you see I got the album art here. As for before, by default you did not. In order to do this, just be on the home menu here, press start, go to scraper, scrape from, there's 2 resources. Just go to Games DB, that's fine. Hit scrape now. We'll do all games, start. So it's looking, it's reading the title. Okay, Banjo-Kazooie, it's gonna give you a couple different options there. Yep. 1998, has the developer, publisher, all that stuff, so we're going to select that. Super Mario, there's different versions here, Japan. The first one right here, yep, this was also a 96 title. 96 was a good year for Nintendo gaming. Bam, so now, when we come back to our N64 here, you see we have the album art, little description of the game, all that good stuff. So let's launch Banjo over here. But one of the cool things you can do with RetroPie is where when you launch a game, it'll show like a cool graphic of the game. It'll show you the box art with the year it came out, a description of the game and whatnot, which is super cool. You don't need this SD card inserted into the RetroPie when you're playing your games. Once you've inserted this, it takes a few minutes and it's going to transfer everything from here onto the SD card of the actual system, so you don't really need this plugged in anymore. This is just for transferring games back and forth between your PC and your RetroPie. However, like I said, you can also do that via the interweb, but both devices have to be on the same network, so the same LAN, same router, and I'll have a separate tutorial on how to do that. Alrighty guys, that is going to do it for this video, but this is just part 1 in a series, a playlist that I'm going to have on this channel called RetroPies, where I go through different RetroPie hardware builds as well as software images and builds, much like this one right here, the 256 gig Fire and Ice build. Look at all these consoles on here. 1,500 in-arcade games, 99 Atari 2600 games. You got background music playing here. You've got all the scripts pre-installed here. You can overclock directly from the console. Full Kodi builds. This build looks absolutely gorgeous. 16 PSP games, 400 PlayStation games here. Let's launch something real quick. Full load screens for each console, which is awesome. Every console is also tweaked and optimized, so N64 games are going to run smoother because they already have all these scripts and workarounds, bug fixes pre-installed. So we're going to learn how to do all that stuff together, guys. This is my Pi 3B Plus here, which is overclocked and has a whole bunch of goodies on it. As you see, this build has the bezels, so when you're playing like a Game Boy Color game, it actually shows the bezels of like a Game Boy Color screen, and then your game is obviously the correct aspect ratio and resolution for that native console to give you that true emulation experience. So I've showed you guys how to set up a Pi 4, whether you're going to be using Rasbian and using it as a personal computer to do some productivity work, or you're going to use it as a dedicated retro console, and how to upload some games with a USB flash drive. If this video was beneficial for you guys, I would greatly appreciate a thumbs up. This video did take quite a bit of time to set up, record, and edit. There's also timestamps in the description, which will give you a timeline bar where you can skip ahead to any part of the video that you specifically need to rewatch or find out what to do. Man, much like this video, it's game over.